You're live.
Good evening. Thanks for coming to the scope meeting for the South Bar Lake District. We'll be going through, Brian will be going through the four pre-engineered possibilities for a solution for the outfall as it pertains to high water times on Lake Michigan. I'm asking that you keep your comments to these projects. I know people have questions about the district and about why am I in or should I not be in and all that kind of thing. Those would be appropriate on emails. I'd like you to do the email, get it to Laurel, she'll get it to me, we'll put it up on the website. All of those comments are really, really beneficial for me. Tonight, we're going to be talking about these four different options and other options that you might want us to consider and anything to do with the project. That's the purpose of our scope meeting. So with those ground rules in effect, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Brian Sensi on the GEI. He's the engineer that's spearheading the operation. You probably can tell from what's been put out to this time, GEI is a pretty big outfit. They've got a lot of different experts that can weigh in on projects such as this. Brian has gone through quite a number of these over the last 2 decades, and we're fortunate, I believe, to have him, and I'm glad that he switched over to GEI. It's a company that has plenty of muscle, and for us, I believe that's a good thing. So anyway, Brian?
Okay, so it should be sharing up there on the screen now for everyone. Sorry, yeah, for those here, if you turn to the left. So, Steve,
Yeah, if you want him to jockey around,
If you want to hit the light a little bit.
is it one of these guys, Laurel?
Yeah.
okay. So as Steve said, my name is Brian Sensi. I'm with GEI. I head up our drain and county water resources work for county drain commissioners in the state of Michigan. And some of you may remember me from the Board of Determination meeting, which we had in October 2020. And as we said at that meeting, we would have a scope meeting when we got to a certain point and come back to the public again and basically talk about it a little bit on the project and going forward and really what we're going to do going forward. So the very first thing is I just want to go over the purpose of what tonight is in this informational meeting, scope meeting. This is not something that is required in the drain code to do for drain commissioners. Quite frankly, the drain code, when it was written in 1956, things were certainly a lot different then as far as communication with people and whatnot. But in that time, you would have the VOD, and the next time you would see the drain commissioner is when it was time to pay for things. So we do these scope meetings and informational meetings at different points on projects. This one earlier on in the project, so that you can be aware of what's going on. There's a basic issue that started, and that's the reason for the petition. I'll get into that. But the purpose of the scope meeting is we want to make sure that we are addressing any of the problems that need to be in regards to this drain petition. Even though the petition was about one specific thing, and the outlet is South Bar Lake into Lake Michigan, we want to make sure and address anything that needs to be done if there are. So then we want to give you some options. These are basically, we went through different alternatives on some things that we could do in regards to an outlet and provide some costs for that. And we want to get your feedback, basically. We're not, this isn't, I don't think we're gonna take a straw vote and say, and base our decisions off that, but I think this is really set up so Steve can get an understanding of where the scope of this project needs to be and what the end result is for what gets done or what the solution is. Because cost is obviously a big consideration on things. There's other things like permitting, the time. Some of these options will take more time to from now until when they could be constructed because they require a lot of permitting, things like that. So we just want to get feedback from people and see what they have to say. And then I'll go through basically what's next. Where do we go from here in the project? And then answer any questions. And we will get into the cost at the very end of the presentation. I'll go through how we're going to assess the cost. And that is kind of irrespective of whatever option is picked. The assessment and how it's apportioned is a little bit different. And so I'll go through all that and explain that in regards to the cost. Thanks. So the very first picture you see on there, that's December 2020. That kind of gets into the next. Oh, geez. I went to the end. Sorry. It kind of gets into the next slide of what's the issue, what we're here for. But you can see that is a picture of the South Bar Lake outlet. That was in December 2020, and I believe just a couple weeks prior, the village had actually cleaned the end of that out. So that is from Lake Michigan Drive, just north of where the beach is, basically in Empire there. And it's only a 35, 40 foot long section of pipe. Basically, the lake, when it is up high, the sediment and sand from the lake in the Littoral Zone is the technical term, but that's basically the area near shoreline where you get a lot of sand and sand movement and sand washout from wave action, basically. So that is from wave action, basically filling in the culvert, which is the outlet for the lake. So when that gets filled in, obviously there's little or no drainage going through the culvert and into the lake, and thus the water in South Bar Lake is coming up subsequently at that time. So just to give a review of the timeline of where we're at, June 11, 2020, the village petitioned the drain commissioner to first establish a drain district and then establish a county drain. Those were the items that we went through at the board of determination, and kind of the only things we talked about at the BOD. If you remember, we didn't talk about any of these possible designs or solutions. We simply talked about what the issue was and a few basic things like the district and the route of the drain. In that beginning phase from June to October, we basically, the law says you have to hire a professional engineer and they determine what the district is and the most feasible prudent route for the drain of what that would be for the county drain. Just because there's a creek or a ditch, that may mean it's a drain, but especially Leelanau County, it's probably not a county drain, meaning it is under the jurisdiction of the county drain commissioner. It has gone through this petition process. So in order for a drain to be under the county drain commissioner's jurisdiction, it needs to also be in the road right away, or it has to have easement over it if it's on private property. So there are a lot of drains in Leelanau County. Most are not technically county drains, but this is the process for establishing at least the outlet for South Bar Lake as part of a county drain. We had the board of determination October 22nd, 2020, and then really since November 2020, we went and surveyed the area, basically the beach area, because one of the things that we wanted to look at is if we moved where the outlet and the control structure is for South Bar Lake, because it's up on a very small, skinny private drive, where it's difficult to work in and maneuver in, especially for unloading, loading off a lot of dirt, or excuse me, sand. When that gets clogged up, to put it in a 5-yarder, So we looked at possibly moving it down on the beach and moving it closer to where the boat launch is for South Bar Lake. So we did surveying work. The big thing that we did in regards to it is we put together a watershed model. And the big thing with that is that allows us to understand how the lake acts after rain events. So we used surveying and we took measurements after rain events. We took rainfall data and we can get an understanding, like if we get a 2-inch rain in a 12-hour period, does the lake come up an inch? Does it come up 4 inches? So we basically put together a watershed model so we can understand. So if we have to build a new outlet, there's certain requirements that the state has for flood protection on lakes and things like this. So you have to be able to pass certain size storms in these types of situations for catastrophic or flood events. So really putting together that model is a big part of the work that goes into this. Then we had discussions with Eagle on DNR. Those are very critical because we basically go over and tell them what the issue is, and then we get feedback on, okay, these are the things that for you to get a permit to do this, you're gonna have to show X, Y, and Z, or you're gonna have to give us all this type of information. And so we get an idea of really how much effort is gonna be involved for each of the different options. Which ones are they basically gonna say, no, we just don't see how this is possible to actually permit it. And then we got good feedback from like the DNR, for example. A big thing we needed to understand right away is if we replace the culvert, are we going to be held to certain standards that they have, requirements that they have, for example, fish passage. Because this was, I believe at one point, what this outlet for South Bar Lake was where they used to float logs through. And even though there isn't a direct water connection at this time, do we need to plan for fish passage? And the DNR came back and said we do not, which is a huge thing because if we had that, basically means that we've got to allow a certain amount of water in the culvert. We've got to allow a certain amount of water to be able to go back and forth. And it's certainly going to put it in a much longer and larger culvert we'd have to do. But they came back and said that we do not have to plan for fish passage at the outlet of the lake into Lake Michigan. And then basically putting the stuff together, present the findings here. The next slide on page 4 here, this is just the drainage district boundary. I wanted to go over this for those of you that weren't at the board of determination. This does not change from what the BOD is, and we aren't going to change the district boundary until we get to the very end when we have the day review of apportionments. We will also have a day review regarding this district boundary. We have, if you're at the board of determination, you may remember I said that this is going to be the boundary, which is essentially a watershed boundary. It's the line, it's the thick red line that you see on that map. In simple terms, it means that if rain falls within that red area, it eventually makes its way to South Bar Lake and ultimately can make its way out at some point to Lake Michigan from the South Bar Lake outlet. A real simplistic way to look at it is we use these district boundaries. We use that in the assessing because we say, if we're dealing with, as an example, 100 gallons of water, what percent are you of that 100 gallons? Are you a tenth of a gallon? Is that your contribution to it? And so we kind of then relate that into the assessing portion of it and what your contribution is to the water of the system that we then have to handle as part of the drain project. The total district size is 3,333 acres. There are 453 acres, about 14%, which are state or federal lands. I'll go over this later, but in the world of assessing, we can't assess anything higher than our level. So at the county level, we can't assess state or federal lands. So those costs that would get apportioned to, if those were regular properties, basically gets rolled into and everyone else in the district, including the at-larges, pay that portion of it. So instead of dealing with the assessment roll of 333 acres, you're dealing with one with 2,880 acres, basically. There's around 820 properties in the district. The majority of the district is part of Empire Township, that's 2,600 acres, a little over, and then just under 700 acres for the village. There are 4 what we call at-large entities, and I'll explain this in the assessing part. But an at-large entity is basically a municipal entity that receives some benefit from the drain for public health, convenience, or welfare. And they're all kind of assessed on a different scale. The township and the village are assessed basically for benefits to public health, convenience, and welfare. And the county, by means through the county roads and MDOT, they're basically paying for assessing, they're paying assessment on their right-of-way areas that they have within. And that's kind of based on a mathematical formula that they have set up. So if M22 is through here and it's 1% of the total acreage, they might be 1% of the total cost, for example, MDOT is. But so those are the at-large entities, and in the assessing terms, those are the first people to pay, basically. So you have a pie that's 100%, and they may be 35–40% of the total cost. And then that remaining 60–65% that will get assessed out to all the landowners in the district. The proposed route, again, the drain is essentially, we just called it where the existing outlet was. It's a 58 by 36 inch elliptical CMP. Really only about the top half of it is exposed. Maybe the top 2/3, the bottom third is completely covered in material and through there. The 2 photos, the one at the very top is kind of looking to the south. Lake Michigan is to the right there, or to the west of you in the picture. And at the very right, you can see where the outlet is to Lake Michigan, and you can see how small the road is in through there, and just how the sand dunes basically come right up to the road into that area. In the bottom left-hand picture, that's just kind of you can't really see the pipe, but at the very left-hand side of the picture is where the outlet is for, and the control structure is for the weir at South Bar Lake, and then where it outlets into Lake Michigan. And the drain route, the total drain, we basically just called where the channel starts. So the very end of the channel all the way to Lake Michigan, which at the time was around 180 feet. And the drain pusher is not held to that route, so it doesn't have to be at that location. It's just the initial requirements. One thing to note about that location, so the 2020, I believe it was, the village went through and got easements over that existing pipe. So that existing outlet, they had, prior to that, did not have any easements over that pipe. One of the things I did is we did a significant amount of research into essentially the control structure. It's a weir that's on the end of the culvert, and that's what controls the elevation of South Bar Lake. So when water gets up to a certain point and gets over that weir, then it dumps over it into the culvert and out in Lake Michigan. If it doesn't get up high enough to that weir, it simply will just hold into the lake, and there'll be no water going out into Lake Michigan. Most of the time, there's water going over the weir. At least most of the times, in at least the 10 or so different times I've been there in the last 2 years. So there's usually water going over the weir. Even in the summer, at least the one time I saw it last time. So, but one thing we did do was we did a lot of research, and Steve did too, trying to find out how did that level get set? Who picked that level? We went to people at Dam Safety who basically oversee all the permitting for lake level control structures, and for doing it's called the Part 307 process. When you establish a legal lake level on an inland lake, they have no record of any established county court order legal lake level on South Bar Lake, which on the permitting end is kind of good and bad. If there were a level, it makes things a lot easier for us. And now without a level, it just means that we may need to provide more information to the state, because they essentially, whatever they approve, they're probably going to want to mimic the level that we have out there now. We're going to basically need to prove that that should be the legal lake level. which we've done before, so it's not the end of the world just because it doesn't have an established legal court order level. But there are easements that are transferable, so we've already drafted a resolution, and our hope would be, and especially if we go with one of the options at its current location, with those easements would be transferred to the drain commissioner's office, and then they would have jurisdiction and be responsible for maintaining of that culvert. The existing infrastructure, again, is just a small CMP. There's some pictures of it, the existing drain culvert. The intake, that's basically where the wire bar is. There's a weir that kind of covers it all the way across, and you can just see water going over the weir. And then the picture that says outfall to Lake Michigan, that's on the Lake Michigan side. The sheet piling that you see, those metal things that are kind of each side of the pipe, those were recently installed, I believe, in the fall of 2020 or the spring of, the fall of 19, or in 2019 or 2020. But those were installed basically to hold the road in through there because it started to erode away around that culvert. So there's some other pictures, actually, at the very top picture, you kind of see how bowed out that retaining wall is up against that culvert into there, because basically what happened is sand will basically completely fill that in, and there's a lot of erosion that comes off the road as well. And so that area is extending it is probably something that we would need to do if we kept it in the same location. So the next couple of slides are just, these are the issues, the issue going on. I'm not going to repeat too much. It's predominantly when the lake is up, but you will see, so there's a picture of the one with my pit bull in it on the right there. That's October, that's just this past October. They had put an extension on there, but you can see they had just cleaned that out, cleaned that area out again. The one where it says pictures from November 27, 2020, the one in the very middle, you can see that's sediment all the way up to the top, over the top of the pipe, that filled in after a significant storm and wave action. The very bottom left hand is that's a picture just last week, and you can see off of the road there, because the dunes get mounded up, and in that area that you get directed runoff and off from the road in that area too as well. And then you can see the very bottom middle picture, and then the very bottom right, you can kind of see that's the extent of the culvert that actually passes water into there. So it's a pretty large culvert. When I say it's 58 by 36, that means it's 36 inches tall, 58 inches wide. The other reason for that is because of the depth of it. There is a water main utility that goes right underneath this. So if they had a larger pipe, they would have been into that water main as part of it. So that's why one of the options, option 4, we proposed box culvert, which is essentially not as tall as it is wide. So it's a wider culvert as compared to being tall. So we could hopefully avoid the same issue as well. The next slide, these are just some more pictures. So to date, the cleaning out and the maintenance of this outlet of South Bar Lake has been done by the Village of Empire, meaning that they are paying for 100% of the cost. The last sentence I have there, the jurisdictional requirement for the village to have to perform this work is unknown, and I'm not an attorney, but without having legal lake level and going through this process, quite frankly, it's not really their responsibility to have to keep up and maintain that, especially when it gets full of sediment. We talk to their workers, get an idea of the amount of effort it takes to have to clean it out. And to do that, we're talking days of work. So we're talking days of 2 people, 3 people working down there to get that cleaned out. They have to have a hydro or backhoe down there. They have to get a 5-yarder. They have to load the sand out. It's not the easiest to get access in and out there. So it does take a considerable amount of time, and some years it's a considerable cost that they're having to pay. So the idea behind making this a drain, and this is something I said at the Board of Determination, is even if there was nothing done, so there were gonna be no improvements done, we're gonna just leave it the same. The worst case that you get out of it is that, and one of the reasons the village petitioned is because now in the future, the assessments, they're gonna be a portion of the cost, not 100% of the cost. So they may be 15% in the future, 20%, whatever it ends up being. So that's a big part of it because they're paying 100% of it. And really, there isn't, jurisdiction speaking, there isn't anything up to this point that said that they had to be doing it. Now, they didn't, the lake comes up and it gets to flood levels. And it does threaten some homes on the lake under there. So it's a necessity that has to be done. The very two bottom pictures though, there's one on the left, that's just after cleaning it out. And then there's a picture just immediately there on the right. That is a picture that they took right before they cleaned it out. And the one on the left is them cleaning it out. So you can see they're just removing enough basically to open up and get the water moving again onto the lake. The pictures on the right, those are of adjacent along South Bar Lake that were taken in the summer, in the fall of 2020. So that just shows you when the outlet is basically blocked with sediment and material from Lake Michigan, and it can't drain the lake. The lake comes up, and that does cause damage to property. There's a couple docks that are completely underwater, and there's water up into a home on one of the properties. So, slide 9, we get into the meat of what we're here for the scope meeting. And so there were initially 3 options. We met 2 weeks ago, and then we kind of developed a 4th option. But we looked at doing 2 different things in regards to, there's basically 2 ways to move water: by gravity, so downhill, or you can do it through pumping. In that case, you can move water, uphill a lot of different ways. So kind of option 1 and 2, we looked at moving the location basically down on into the beach area, so that it wasn't back in this private Lake Michigan Drive and in such a difficult area. So we looked at moving it down to the actual beach. Option 1 is basically a gravity outlet, and then option 2 was something that would be a pumping option. So, and on both of those, option 1 and 2, to the right there is that's what we call the intake or the control structure for the lake. So it's like taking a cross section of pie and looking at it. So the very right, yeah, you can see this one cursor here. This is the water level, for example. So we call this a deep water intake. I know South Bar Lake isn't that deep, especially as you get to the south end of it. But essentially, you have your intake as low as you can get towards the bottom of the lake. That goes into a weir or control structure that's underground, that is on shore, that you can access. And then in that control structure, so this is the weir that's inside of it. It's basically in the middle of the manhole, and it works the same type of weir system that is at the current outlet. Water under hydraulic pressure, the water of the lake will reflect the same in that control structure. So it has to get over a certain level of that weir, whatever that end elevation is that is determined, and then it'll go out to the outlet. And in option 1, that outlet is a gravity feed, and in option 2, that's a pump system. So the next one, this is an overview of option 1. And this is moving the new outlet control structure down to Beach Park, installing a new deep water intake, having the control structure on the ground, and then basically cutting across near the play course there, and then outletting near where the existing riprap shoreline is on Lake Michigan, in that area, in through there. One of the big drawbacks of this, and one of the big drawbacks of having anything down onto the beach is we were told several different instances that if we are gonna dig pretty much anywhere in this beach area, we're probably gonna run into old foundation from the sawmill. And that is not just like our house foundation where it's, you know, a cinder block thick, but this is feet thick of concrete, and it would be very significant to have to work around or, so a couple of the workers for the public works at the village indicated us just a few times where they tried to work in there, they ran into it each time. So that was and is a big concern, because with the gravity option, our pipe is gonna have to be deeper going in the ground as compared to a pump option. We can have it with maybe only 2 feet of cover, so we don't have to dig very deep. And possibly with the pump option, that might avoid those footings depending on where they're at. So with this option, we put together construction costs, and I'll go through the costs of all of them at the end and then kind of explain. This is just the construction cost. This is not the entire financing cost of the cost of the project, which we finance for. The entire project cost, I would say on most drain projects, the construction cost is going to be about 60 to 70% of the overall cost. Under the law, like, we have to add 15% of whatever our cost is. So if it's $500,000, we automatically are required by law to add 15% to that when we go and borrow the money. That's our contingency amount that you're required under the drain code to have to put in. But I just wanted to give you an idea of at least the construction costs, because those are things that we can tangibly provide good estimates and costs to at this point in regards to these items. The reason we can't come up with a total cost for each one, because we make a lot of speculation assumptions on permitting and things like that. Again, this one, option one, would be very easy on the permitting end, because we would choose the outlet. Option two would be easy on the permitting end because of a pump system. We get outlet above the water, and we don't have to worry about Lake Michigan and really what level it's at. So from a permitting standpoint, we wouldn't need to get either a permit from the EPA through the Army Corps of Engineers, or a permit through the state, through Eagle, because when you work as under a certain level on Lake Michigan, you actually have to get 2 different permits, one from the state and one through federal. But because we would outlet above that level, we wouldn't need to get a permit. The only permitting we would need would be for whatever control structure we have on South Park Lake. So there's a lot less work that goes into that permitting for some of these options than the other ones. Option two, again, basically the same alignment. It's just going to a pump system. The advantage is we can avoid having to get into the lake with our outlet. You don't have to get a permit for any work that you do above any water body's ordinary high water mark. So we wouldn't need a permit on the Lake Michigan side, and we wouldn't have to dig a pipe as deep. A lot of people in my world, in the engineering world, are scared of pumps. The pumps have dramatically come down in cost and dramatically improved in performance, especially just in the last 10 or 15 years. When I first got involved in engineering in the late 90s, I mean, pumps were absolutely the last resort, and now it's sometimes the first thing you look at, because a pump like this that maybe we want to do around 2,000 gallons per minute, you're only talking about a $50,000 pump in total, and that's for the entire pump unit. So that's the housing unit itself with all the electrical controls, everything. So pumps have come way less down as far as again, cost of them, and their design life costs have gone way up. I mean, most pumps are at a minimum on an 8 to 10 year life cycle cost, and that's with running them. You know, most pump systems we're running, you know, half the days of the year, for example, assuming you're not running in the winter when it's frozen. So option three is kind of, this is certainly one that would be the most difficult on the permitting end. It's the one that completely eliminates the issue of this wave action, the lake being up and having to deal with the sediment. It essentially, we would install through directional drilling, a pipe basically from the shore and tell it with daylight, and we get past the, again, the littoral zone along the shoreline, which is varies by each area, but here it's probably 300-400 feet. Where that starts is kind of where you see the sandbar out there. If you look out, that sandbar from there into shore, that's where 95% of your sand and sediment deposit is going to be taking place within that 300-400 feet. So that's why it's important if we get past that point, especially in the bottom, because wave action, most of your sand is going to be in the top part of the water column, especially as you get close to shore. So if we're 8-9 feet deep, 400 feet out, we're below really impact of any kind of wave action and whatnot into there. But this one is very difficult permitting from the amount of work that goes into it. It's not just, I don't think it would be any more difficult to get a permit. It's just would have to provide a lot more information. You have to do sediment modeling for Lake Michigan because there's, and it's all different in different areas. Basically, how much sediment transfers and moves along the beach and how it moves along the beach. One thing we looked a lot at, we would just not, the state just does not permit these things anymore. You know, break walls, seawalls, things like that, stuff to break up the waves. We looked a lot at that. You know, could we just do something for when the lake comes up to break the waves up so there isn't pushing that wave action and pushing all the sand in? Seawalls and things were huge in the 80s, and the state is pretty much not gone to not permitting any of them anymore. The reason is because they interrupt that natural sand movement that takes place along the shoreline. And they want that sand movement because they consider that natural, so to speak. So we did look a lot at what we could do to affect the lake, but that is certainly a much more costly option. And then the last thing that we looked at, an option is it's kind of twofold. It essentially replace the culvert in the same location, for the most part, as is. I assume we'd have, we wouldn't have this same type of control structure, that deep water draw that we looked at on the other options. We would probably just do a weir at the end of the pipe, similar to this now. But then the backup is essentially a pump system. So you have a pump system on a float, so that if the water gets too high in the channel on the South Bar Lake side, the pump kicks on and it basically lifts the water up, and we would discharge it between the lake and the road. But the discharge would be in a pipe, and then there would be an elbow up. So it would be basically like a vertical discharge, and the water would come out kind of like a volcano. There'd be riprap around either side of it, and it would come down. So that outlet wouldn't be impacted because it would be so far up above any kind of level or wave action level that you would have for Lake Michigan. So it doesn't eliminate the fact that you're still going to get sediment in through there. What we would basically do is we would install curb and gutter in the road there to deal with the scouring that would get off the road. But then we would install basically a little pad, kind of like a driveway down, where a piece of equipment like a hydro hoe or backhoe could just go down immediately right off of the road, and it'll be like a gravel pad, and they could turn and work, and then have the truck in the road to be able to take the sediment and dump it in the truck into the road. So all those things, so installing that access, these all would be things that we would need to get permitted for. But then the pump is something that's there that, for the most part, like you know, now Lake Michigan in this area is down about 2 feet different, maybe 2.5 feet close difference than it was up at its highest in October of 2020. So right now they're, you know, they can't remember how many times last year they said they cleaned it out.
Once in the fall, I know.
Yeah, it wasn't as
Once
much
in the fall.
because the lake was obviously down, so they weren't getting it as bad. So the pump would only be used when it filled in again. So you're still gonna have the sediment issue. We did talk to some of the workers, and one thing we would do with this culvert is we would install basically taps in a couple spots, so maybe one in the middle and then one on either side of the road. And what that would do would be, they could allow them to take basically like to clean out a big culvert. You typically clean out any pipe, you have what's called a jet rotter, which is basically just a super high pressure hose that you stick in a pipe. Sometimes it has a little rotor that goes around and sprays like in a circle, kind of like your dishwasher, but that's what cleans out sediment from pipes. So they have said this is an extremely hard culvert to clean out the way it is now, because they only can get access on this side, and then access is very difficult getting down there. So getting hose and material big enough and enough water pressure to push that stuff through is hard. So we would put holes in where they could put those jet rotters directly in, like to the middle, and then maybe 10 feet either side of the middle to push out that sediment. So we would do some things to make it easier to clean out that culvert for them. But then that you have that pump in the suction intake line, again, that is always there and would always be in use. It would be an electrical pump, and it would work on a float system. So if the water wasn't up, and what we would probably do is something like you would have like a 2 or 3 inch float that would be set 2 or 3 inches higher than what the weir is. So if the lake got up 2 or 3 inches higher, that's, it's telling the pump float basically that you need to turn on and start draining this lake down, because something is blocking the water from going down the weir, which, in most cases is going to be the sediment that's pushed up from the lake. So those are kind of the 4 different options. The cost, the cheapest one is around $265,000 on construction. The highest one was close to $500,000. That's the one that involves getting out on the lake. And then option 2, $345,000, and option 4 we had around $310,000 or so for construction.
Could you repeat those 5?
Yeah, so
Option
one
1, 2, and 3.
was 264,400. Option 2 was 345,500. Option 3 was 477,900. And option 4 was 309,200 that we had.
Brian, we will be posting that on the website.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sure they'll put this on the
Yeah.
their webpage, so you can download and look at the presentation.
Yeah, all the
after.
slides will be
All
posted.
So then we get into the very last thing, which is, at all these meetings, what I always call, where people say, where's the beef? What's the cost? That's the big thing they want to know. So this gives you into a representation. So the gray is your at-large, and your green areas are your parcels. So in this case, usually at-larges, typically you always usually have a township. MDOT is not usually in districts. They have to have their right of way in it. The county pays for benefits to county roads. And then through the gas tax law, Act 51, they actually pay half of the assessment. The road commission pays the other half through your gas tax money, basically, that they get. And then the 2 municipal entities are the village and then Empire Township. And again, those are on this particular project, because we're not dealing with an issue, we're dealing with, this is affecting a lot of properties that are on the lake. Pretty much anyone that owns a home on South Park Lake, anything that has to do with the level of that lake and maintaining a consistent level, we tend to, because that's more of a regional issue, we're looking at between 35–40% of those costs would be the at-larges. So, and then the parcels would be the remaining portion. So the very bottom bullet point on that says assessments will minimally, these are the categories, the things that we will for sure look at and will be part of the formula that goes into a person's assessment. It doesn't mean that these are all of them, but these are the main ones, the size of your parcel. And we don't get into, we're simply looking at, if it has a parcel number or property number. If it's a platted area and you have 4 lots, but it's only one parcel number and you get one tax bill, you're only gonna get one tax bill on this. It doesn't have to do with how many lots you have. It's just simply the number of parcels and parcel numbers that you have. So it'll be based on the size of the parcel. The runoff coefficient, which is basically, we look at the amount of pervious versus imperviousness on your property. So the easy way to look at it is, a commercial property with a parking lot, a 1 acre commercial property, the parking lot is gonna run off more water than a 1 acre property with just a house on it and a gravel driveway. They're gonna run off more volume per acre. So we apply a factor to each property based on its type of land use. And that's the same thing. So a residential property, if you have a 3,000 square foot house on a 1/4 acre lot, you're gonna run off more volume per acre than that same 3,000 square foot house on a 1/2 acre lot. Because you have the second scenario, the second example in that scenario is twice the big a property. And so you've essentially increased the perviousness ratio, meaning that's the stuff where water can go down into the ground. Impervious surface would be like the parking lot out there or roofs. They're basically impervious. Water hits it and runs off for the most part. So we assign a factor, a runoff factor to the property space, trying to get down to, again, what percentage are you of the water that we're dealing with? So it kind of gets into a mathematical formula. As an example, most commercial properties are like a 0.8 or 0.9. What that means is if 100 gallon hits it, 80 gallons are gonna run off somewhere. So the drain has to deal with 80 gallons. So that would be a 0.8. Residential properties are usually like a 0.3 on like a 1/2 acre to 1 acre size lot. If it's a small lot, then the coefficient goes up a little bit, again, because you're decreasing typically the amount of pervious surfaces you have, and you have more impervious to pervious on smaller size lots. In like agricultural, we usually use like a very low factor, and the larger size agricultural properties that you have, the lower the runoff factor is typically. So like typically ones that are over 40 acres, we use like a 0.05. So if you want to get into comparison standpoint, 0.05 is versus 0.3, you're talking about that property that's getting assessed at a 0.3 being assessed at a 6 times higher rate compared. But most agricultural properties in this district are very large. So we're simply not trying to just base it off of parcel size, because that doesn't tell you the whole story. The last thing is proximity to the work, and basically if you have access to or on the lake. Because that's really ultimately the big thing. The real danger issue associated with this from failure is you're gonna have the lake height increase and then having an uncontrollable level for the lake. This will basically allow for a consistent, maintainable level going forward. So we're gonna look at where your property is located. So someone on South Bar Lake, you will be assessed at a higher rate. Doesn't mean your amount is gonna be more, but you're at a much higher rate than a farm that is 1.5 miles away to the east in this district. So we, just because someone owns a large parcel certainly does not mean that we assess them more, for example. So, but those are the main items that we will look at in assessment. So if you kind of just threw all that out, let's say we had a $500,000 total project cost, for example, and let's say 40% of that are at-larges. So that's 300,000 to get assessed out to the property owners. If you, and this is not, again, this is not how it will be, but if you wanted to just have a rough idea of things, if you took 820 properties and divided it evenly, that's $365 total per parcel. When we assess this, we have not determined this. It's kind of based on the size of the project and how much the total is, but we do assess it out over, we bond it out or finance it out over a number of years. We're doing a project now over in Solon Township, which is only 20 some properties, and we're gonna do a 20-year payout of it because there's a lot of work that's being done in a subdivision. There's only 20 properties, so they're $7,000-8,000 assessments. They're gonna pay that out over 20 years. So we will get a note at 2.25%, and it works like a mortgage. You pay the same principal when your interest is highest in the beginning and lowest at the end. Type of thing. I do not see us doing a 20-year or a 15-year on this, but it's something based on once we get to the cost, we'll talk to the residents about. Probably at the day review, we'll have an option, maybe like a 5-year payback option and a 10-year, and just get feedback at the day review on what people might think. You do have the ability to always pay it off before we finance it. So before we go and at the end and borrow any money, we will, you have the opportunity just to pay it off and not be subject to any of that. But the assessment, let's say it ends up being $365 for someone's parcel, and we decide to do it for 5 years. You're basically looking at paying around $85 per year, which would end up being. So we get really good interest rates because they're tax-free municipal bonds when people buy this stuff. So it's somewhat attractive to people for financing. And then the assessment shows up on your winter tax bill. I do know that, I'm probably gonna say it wrong. I know one of the two between the village and the township sends out only summer taxes. And I can't remember which is which.
Village sends out
The
some.
village is only summer and the township, so I've had that happen only one other time, surprisingly. Lansing Township and the city of Lansing are the exact same way. They are opposite and when they send out their tax bills. So we will work at it, but it only will show up once on your taxes, basically. One per year, for however many years we decide to go out for the payback period. If you wanted to base it based on, and again, let's say we didn't have runoff coefficients and all those things, and we just wanted to look at acres. There's 2,880 accessible acres in the district. That 300,000. That's basically $100 per acre if we treated everyone the same, which we are saying again, we are not again. So if you have agricultural properties on the east end of the district, you are going to be paying the lowest rate per acre. If you are on the lake, you will probably be paying the highest rate per acre. With that, I think that's everything I wanted to go through. So I'll turn it back over to Steve with how we want to do questions or things like that. I know we had a lot of people that have questions ahead of time and stuff. So.
Right,
But
and
we can take any questions too.
again, I'm gonna encourage, even if you have a question tonight, and probably give you 3, 4, 5 minutes to get a question out or a concept, and then we'll talk about it, and then on to the next person. But I'd encourage everybody that wants to, please email into us tomorrow, the next day, within the next week or two. Get those emails in, well thought out, and there are some in there already. They're in the handout section for the scope meeting, and some very well written comments. And you can read through those and help formulate your own, and we'll get an idea how you're thinking and what you're feeling about it. So anyway, I guess we'll just start with whoever.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You did talk about maintenance costs over a longer period of time. You're talking about the initial cost of setting it up. But if you have pumps, obviously it takes electricity and replacement pumps. I think you said every 10 years or whatever. Can you address that, and how is that paid for?
Yeah, so it's
the maintenance costs are handled a little bit differently depending, so if we went with a non-pump option, if we went with a pump, we're basically in the, what we finance for, certainly for the length of time of which we decide to finance it for, so let's say it's 5 years, we will build in enough maintenance costs so that Steve doesn't have to come back to you in a 5-year period and say, we need money for the electricity for year 4, for example. So we'll build in the maintenance costs on it. The pumps are designed basically such that in a, and this is the standard that the state has used with me on other projects, but basically we look at a 2-day time period, 48 hours. If you get a 10-year, 24-hour rain event, which just means that you have a 10% chance of getting that severe of a storm every year. In this area, that's about 3¼ inches of rain. That you, the pumps are sized to be able to displace that in at least 2 days. So that's the size of them that they have to be. But the maintenance and how long they're gonna be operating, you know, like if this was last year, they might have only kicked on 2 days or 3 days, for example. If they even had to be used, for example, like a pump. As far as the cost, I tried talking and getting some stuff from the village because they did it and I don't, you know, they're paying the cost on it, you know, they don't have like a billable rate and things like that, so, but someone with a day, 2 people for a day with a 5-yard truck and a backhoe to clean out material, you're talking $3,500, $4,000 to do that for a full day for someone. That's probably what it would cost to completely clean out that area. So it would purely, it's hard to get into maintenance because it's going to be based on if the lake is, there's 200 feet of beach, you're probably never going to see any issues without filling in. So therefore, you're not going to have any pump coming on, and you're not going to have any maintenance costs. You're not going to need to clean it out, for example. So a lot of it is based on the lake and that lake height fluctuations. There was a significant study that did the same thing that I did, and they prepared a report in 1986 that the village paid for from the Travers Group, the company, not in Traverse City, in Ann Arbor, actually. But they did the same thing, and they looked at, because the last time the lake was this high was 85 and 86. Because there are fluctuations in about a 15-year up, 15-year down. So every 30 years, you're going to get back up. So some of this is being done now, like the option 4. I talked a lot about this with Steve. I said, you know, we could put the system in place and not buy the pump maybe, or we could buy the pump, but it might sit there for 5 years and not get used. So, you know, it's kind of setting it up and taking care of this issue for the future too, because the lake will come back up at some point and this will be a problem again. It just may not be as big of a problem this year or next year as it was in 2019 or 2020, for example. So it's hard to look at maintenance costs and come up with something that say, okay, you're gonna have this much per year. All I can say on it is we would want to at least make sure that we cover enough so that we do not have to reassess for maintenance in however long we decide to borrow for.
Option 3 is the only one that you don't use a pump on, right?
One is a non-pump too.
One is a non-pump and 3.
Yeah, there's a contingency that's built in too. So when this project is done, there will be monies there.
Right. There's contingency monies, and then we do things like, especially with pumps and electrical, you can, you're allowed to front load certain costs into what you finance for. So the electricity, we would cover that.
And that would be especially important. Let's say we put the plumbing in, and I know I was talking to Carl, it was like, you know, if you've got a house, you're building a house, it's got a full basement, might even have a walkout basement door, but you're just finishing up stairs. But maybe in the future, you drop a couple bedrooms in the basement, finish the basement off. So what do? You plumb it. You put the plumbing in the concrete and cap it off, so that you ever do that basement bathroom, you're ready to go. This is the same kind of idea with the pump system. You put the plumbing in and maybe not even buy the pump. And then the cost is in there for when you have to buy the pump. And it's a go, you buy the pump and the system runs. So, there's some things that we can think about and do that would keep the initial cost down. But I guess it's my job to think about the next time that the lake is gonna be out. And I might not be here to see it, but somebody will. And, that's kind of my job to say, okay, we need to have something in place for that time frame. And that's kind of why we're here. And that's kind of why we're looking at these systems. Let's start here and I'll go around.
Steve, John Collins. First, I appreciate the district taking a serious look at 4 options here. For option 1 and 2, which is down at the beach park, what happens to the outlet and culvert? The existing outlet and culvert, does that go away?
That would be my understanding.
right, most likely it would go away, but that would kind of be something that it would get. Really, the state would have a lot to say in regards to that, like if we'd have to leave it in place or we could take it out.
It would be up.
My
to
preference would be to
property
take it
owners
out.
that live there, and it could be left there, or it could be filled in.
Right, I
Because
kind
there
of
would be no need
anticipated
for-
that
there
it
would
wouldn't be.
no
it
need
wouldn't be-
for a culvert there,
Right, we would
Is that
simply
correct?
take out the culvert there.
but there would be no need for a culvert
No,
anymore
there wouldn't. be.
under option 1 and 2.
Right.
Thank you.
Let's go right here.
It's my
Can
understanding.
you just say your name before you
Oh,
start?
I'm Tom Pykos. I live up M72, just a mile or so outside town. It's my understanding, this majority of this problem is caused by the fluctuation of Lake Michigan. Right? So I guess I have a hard time understanding why the drainage, the supposed drainage district is responsible for the problem financially.
Because ultimately, that's where the water within that district is making its way to the lake and then, from the lake, it's to Lake Michigan. So it's,
If you drive from our property towards Empire, the topography goes up and then comes back down. And the district is, I think you have it delineated out to, County Road 677. But the water from that area does not go to Empire. It may look like it does, but there's an elevation climb as you go into town. And also, any groundwater any water that comes down in our area goes straight down. The water table is 140 feet down. In our area.
Make sure you do it. That way. Because when we're at the end of the process.
yeah,
we'll be
again, the
looking at
district
these
is
kinds of
one
things.
at the DOD for purposes of,
I guess if I go back to
we
my
made it
question,
larger than what it's
Lake
going to
Michigan
be.
rises, and everybody's property is falling into Lake Michigan. Who's responsible is that, for that? They are, right?
Right, Brian was gonna say, let him, that question is a good question, but I don't know if we'll address it here tonight, but Brian had a response from your previous.
Yeah, I mean, the district, we basically looked at the county's LiDAR data. And it's not necessarily anything, it's not all the water that goes to the village. I mean, a lot of water in South Bar Lake comes on. There's a big wetland system that kind of separates it between, on the very north end. There's a lot of wetlands. And so there's drainage that comes down to the north near like the core and just south of Boyce Road and whatnot. But at the very end, once we have when we have the day review of apportionments, and that is when, after we've bid the project out for construction, we know what the cost will be. You will get a first-class notice in which it will say, this is your approximate apportionment, your percentage, your approximate assessment, your approximate payment per year, and then the length of payment, payback that we're looking to do. And then it'll have on it, you'll get that letter at least 10 days prior to the day of review. On the day of review, from 9 to 5, you'll be able to come in and talk with myself and the drain commissioner. And that's where, if there's issues like this with the district and you don't think you're in, then we will look at it and we'll make revisions. But even up to the day of review, we will go back through now and look at the district once we have a final project. It's hard to set the district at the very beginning because you don't know what the end project may be. It's feasible and this happened, but we, had a drain where here we're just looking at the outlet of South Bar Lake, but maybe there was an issue in town with the creek or something. And, on another project, we did something with the creek and that changed the district. So you don't know what the solution is at the beginning. It's hard to come up with the district to say, these are the people that need to pay for the solution. So we kind of include a very large area to cover us in case of that. And so what I said at the beginning was, it will be revised. That is the largest that it will see. It will likely come in from that. So prior to the day of review, I will look at that, but send an email to Steve if you want us to look at specific properties because of that. So.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Carl. You said right in the beginning that it's due to high levels of water. So all the water is going to Lake Michigan, not just out of Empire Village, and have a future cause of rising levels. You explored state and federal funding to finance this?
Yes, in the sense that I am very keenly aware of any and all types of grants, low interest loans, things like that, or any type of public infrastructure, whether it's stuff the counties do in townships, villages, or drain projects. There is not anything. The only thing that we could maybe get funding for is through the GLRI, because it's right on Lake Michigan. Possibly for the control structure and the replacement of the culvert, that new pipe. We could possibly get funding for that, but I don't know if that would score very well because the very high part of that is you have to have fish passage, so they want to, like Oceana County, for example, they've gotten 15 bridges paid for that are on tributaries of streams that are right close to Lake Michigan. But because they put back basically box culverts or C-span bridges that will allow fish passage, so they've essentially had to make them larger because they're putting natural bottom in. They've gotten funded for those, so they've had to kind of make a larger project than they would have to get the grant. There are not many grants and for drain projects. They're just not.
Well, where gets the money available?
Nope.
I
It
see
sucks.
down the lake shore, I see MDOT out, sandbagging lakes and
Yep.
stuff. And that's the state money, not the
Yep.
local money.
Yep, so how drains work and pay drain stuff, so none of your taxes pay for anything with drains. Not just Leelanau County and any county in Michigan, your general taxes that you pay, unless there's a special millage that a township has to pay for drain assessments, which I only know 2 townships in the state that have that set up. So any money on drains is paid by special assessments, and it's usually on an as needed basis. That's typically how maintenance is done, and so that's how payment is for. So there's not like a continual revenue stream or anything like that. So just, there are not many grant opportunities for stuff like this.
So I'm not talking grants, I'm talking emergency funding.
There's just not, we could put in a request. I've done this in the 6 other counties I'm working in right now. 5 of them, we did ARPA money requests. And one county, we got 200,000, but they will only pay low income residents. They only pay the assessment for the low income residents. I don't know about, I haven't talked to Steve about requesting that from the county, or if the county's even spent their money, or, most of the counties have spent their money already, so.
Yeah, broadband's get the vote. Let's go one more here.
Just to find John Dalton, just to follow up question to John Collins's question. Shouldn't the cost of decommissioning the existing outlet be included in options 1 and 2 if we're going to float a bond?
Yes, that's why I said that, that's why I used like a $500,000 example. There's gonna be some other costs, but it could be as simple as, just removing that culvert. That might be like $10,000, putting the road back. Or maybe it's easier because of the utilities and how close they are to the utilities, just to flow will fill it, and that's $2,000. So it's not, it can be very cheap just to decommission that, depending on how you do it.
Okay, but that would be included in option.
Yeah.
Let's take one right here.
David Friend, you had mentioned something about the creek, some water, Florence Inlet, maybe? Possibly something to do with that in the future? That's gonna directly impact quite a few people.
Well, I was just saying an example based on where we defined as a drain. As the drain. In this case, it's only that outlet.
How are you proposing to figure out whose properties are pervious and impervious? Is that a Google search? Are you gonna go to everybody's property?
Well, smaller districts, we go in and we basically use the latest aerial, and we basically give every property its own weighted factor. This, we will probably just look at the zoning for each of the properties. So like if we'll look at the zoning and then see what that applies, like if it's R1, does that cover all lots up, all residential lots up to 5 acres in size? And then we'll assign a factor based on the way the property is zoned, essentially.
The new flyover is in.
Yes. Yeah. So we won't go to an individual level, but we'll take like we'll basically base it on the way the property is zoned. So we get that directly from the county and their property class information.
And my last question is draining of the pond behind the park building. Are you involved in that?
No,
The permit for that? Okay, thank you.
That's a separate deal.
I even know what they're doing.
It's a separate deal.
The village, when they petitioned for the drain district, they indicated that it's a big strain on their budget. They said that last year, which was a high year, they spent 275 hours, and that was what they're concerned with. But it seems like that cost is relatively minuscule compared to what we're talking here. I don't know what you pay village workers, but it's under 10 grand for that, those 275 hours. And, you're talking something that would be 40 years worth of, for $500,000.
Well, part of the thing, and this hasn't been.
The second thing is, my guess is, if we go with this option, the village is not going to lay off the maintenance workers. So they aren't going to save the cost.
They are.
So, I'm saying, I think what we've done is we've created this drainage district as a way to spread the cost to the many to benefit the few. And I'm Ryan Bolton. I have a property on Lake Michigan Drive, so I'm probably going to pay heavily. I also have property in the township, and I'm with Mr. Picos. I don't think that the cause of the problem is the watershed. The cause of the problem is the lake level of Lake Michigan and the wave action. And under the statute, the people that benefit from this solution are the people that are supposed to pay. And as I see it, the beneficiaries are the people on Lake Michigan Drive who are worried about that culvert placating them. I'm one of them. The people who have property on South Bar Lake who periodically see their wetlands increase,
would like to have a nice dry beach, on South Bar Lake. And then the third constituent is the village, which says they want to save, money in their budget by spreading the cost over, to a larger district. And I don't see them saving any money to this option, particularly when we don't even know what we really don't know what maintenance is going to be here. That's what I think from this. We know we're going to try to estimate, but we don't know.
Well, one thing that we've talked about, to answer the first question is, and I don't think that the village isn't looking at it like where they're gonna, this is gonna open their workers up for stuff that they should be doing. But Steve can contract with anyone. He can contract with the village and just have them clean it out at their lower cost, enough to cover their equipment and so he can contract with the village to have them do the work at a lower cost than a private company. And then essentially, he as Drakewisher pays whoever the contractor is, and in this case, it's the village, and they do the work. He'll pay them, and the village will end up paying a portion of whatever they're getting paid, they're having to pay. But yes, it's getting distributed out because ultimately, the problem is caused from Lake Michigan, but the solution is dealing with water. And we're dealing with everyone's water in that's within that district. Now, you may be one 10,000th of a percent of a gallon, but there's some portion that you're dealing with water and yes, if you're on South Bar Lake, you do receive more benefit than if someone that's not on the lake. And that's I was trying to explain this.
Well, so then I guess I just asked the commission to consider what we currently do is one of the options. It wasn't up here as one of the options. But when you compare costs, I think you need to look at a fifth option, and that's status quo. Because I think, as I listened tonight, that's far and away the cheapest and most cost-effective option. And it's been working for.
As long as you're.
Well, we didn't look at, the issue with that is you can't, that crossing needs to get fixed if it's gonna be left in place as is.
Yeah, by who though? Why is it everybody else's problem to solve our Lake Michigan Drive problem?
Well, now it's part, now it's essentially that is the county drain. That's what the petition process is for. That's why they went
Yeah,
through
we
it.
went down this road and we're at this point.
Yeah.
We can't go back, can't
It's
go
a very
back.
clever way of basically.
But I mean, an email from you delineating your best option that we didn't cover here would be the best thing for you to do. Let's take a question.
Yeah, I just would like to make a statement. I'm the village president of the park. We did keep track
Dan,
of, yes, a year ago, we paid $25,000 for maintenance of the outlet. Now, that includes the labor of the workers, plus the equipment we have to use. Every time in our budget, every time used piece of equipment, that's billed to a department. In this case, for the first time, we had kept track all year of what it was gonna cost us, to maintain that outlet that year. And it come out to about $25,000, a little bit over.
That was 2021?
That was, I believe that was last year.
2021.
Wow.
So, to give you an idea, Wyman mentioned $10,000, so that may cover your labor costs. But it doesn't cover the equipment, and it doesn't cover the wear and tear on the equipment, and the maintenance and the replacement of the equipment. And we include that as well.
Well, yeah, that was just 2021, 2020. I know you guys cleaned that out a lot.
Yes,
Yeah, 2020 was a big
it
one.
was a terrible year.
Let's go over here.
I had a question about, I'm March guy. I had a question about option number 4, the one with the riprap, it looked like, around the outlet.
Mhm.
Is that riprap out of the water? Is it something that's
Yeah,
is
yeah.
there invisible?
Yeah, most of the riprap is just kind of, there's riprap in that channel now. I was just showing that for the pump outlet option. I should have probably put a profile, but it's basically, it'll be like an elbow at the end like this. The water will come here and then it'll go up. And the riprap will be kind of like a cone around it, the outside, so the water will bubble out the top and then come down the side.
That,
And we do that because it gets above, then you get, your waves or your lake may only ever get down to here, so you're gonna be up higher. So it'll look a little weird,
Yeah.
but,
Well, that option,
but it'll be in that outlet area.
Oh, it
where
will.
Right now, just to the, like, kind of to the side.
It won't be down at the water line.
No, just I kind of put it to the side, it'll be offset.
Okay,
that this riprap,
That's one big channel.
that you're referring
That's
to,
one big channel,
the riprap along the side of the channel would get covered up instantly
okay,
and go away, and I don't, that would not make any sense whatsoever.
yeah.
But having that pipe come up and
Okay.
having a cone of rock around it, and in the pump system, it would be quite a ways away from the lake shore, and it would be high enough that it would always be able to outlet, and the water flows out across the rock. So it's kind of a,
It'd be kind of near, there's a sign right there. I
yeah,
don't know if you're familiar, it'd be kind of near that, more towards.
it
the
would,
sign.
and that thought process needs to be followed through more closely if we're looking toward that one. Because how do you keep people away from that and destroying it and modifying it? And that's a whole nother kettle of fish. And that might be easier to do in the village property than on the private property. So I don't know, that whole thing is what we're looking at.
So since March brought aesthetics, I use Warren Wilson. And so option one and option two and option four both include pumps. So what about the look of the pump, like the building, the sound? How is it going to affect the aesthetics in the area and how we enjoy our crystal quiet beach? You know, that pumps are noisy, and then those are things we have to consider.
Yeah, so any of the pumps would be electric pumps, at least as, you know, and they come in, typically they basically come in their own little, kind of about the size of a doghouse. Most of them are, they come in their own unit. You basically just have to get the hosing to the inlet side and the outlet side, but they are very quiet. I mean, they're not like diesel pumps, which are loud. We have, you know, I have an electric pump 50 feet from this guy's house on another lake project that we did a similar thing on for the lake level control through a pump system. And that was his big concern. And the housing units, they put them in, they dampen so much of the sound, and just electric pumps just aren't that loud. Like, I want to say it's only like 40 or 50 decibels that he hears. It's very quiet.
Assuming that Lake Michigan is on a 30-year cycle, 15-year up, 15-year down, do we have any history data that says, you know, we don't have to clean it when it's way down, we have to clean it out when it's way up, we know we have to do that? And the options with the pumps, if you're in the years where the lake is real down, does the pump even work? Does it work? Does it need to work?
Oh, does it need to operate?
Yes.
I mean, well, that's what we were talking about, like, Steve and I, from a preliminary level, like,
where you go by.
do we just budget for the pump now, for example, you know? If the lake were so far down that we just know there's not gonna be an issue for a year or two, will we just budget for it, or should we get the pump now and install it? They'll be fine, it's not an issue. Once you start cycling them, then then you should cycle them regularly. But simply having it sit there for 2 years, and then that shouldn't be an issue. It's no different than first turning it
When
on.
the lake is down.
Right.
Does the gravity?
The gravity still works. That's what I'm
Right
saying.
now,
So the
we're
gravity
fine.
one would still work. You'd have a new pipe in there. Because the big issue with that culvert now is certainly without that bracing that they just temporarily put in there, the village did, that road would cave right in. I mean, the wood retaining walls that they put in are bowed out at least 6 to 8 inches completely.
Do we have any data that says, you know, you see the Lake Michigan chart in the paper, it says it's slightly above average now or approaching average, when it's below average, do we know what the current drain doesn't require any maintenance, does it work fine?
We don't have any information, I mean, we have the Lake Michigan height records for 120 years, but as far as when it needs to be done,
It'd be
we're only
village-
taking it from the village.
It'd be
Just
village anecdotal.
talking to their, and I forget
It gets cleaned out occasionally
the main guy.
with low water, it'll plug and.
Yeah, he said they do clean it out even when they don't get it completely blocked.
It's a lot easier. to
Because he
clean.
was telling me just to clean it out, normally, that's where we talked about and just kind of spitballed some things about ways to make it easier for them to actually clean it out, because it is very difficult to clean out a big pipe with sediment in the bottom. You can't just take a jet rotor and get it. You know, get the sediment out that's gonna be 15 feet away. You need to have access points. So we talked about something like that. 'Cause they did say it is hard to clean it out just even regularly without even.
Are there pipes available that won't collect the sediment, that would only allow water out, not in?
Well, there's not pipes, there's ways to design things, like if you put a pipe at like 10% grade, it's not gonna ever have any sediment sitting in there. In general, we'd wanna have about at least 0.5% of fall in through here, so that's maybe like to the lake, we probably wanna have at least a minimum of 1/2 foot of fall from the water level in South Bar Lake to the other side of the culvert where the water was coming.
I guess what I'm getting to is.
That'll help keep sediment out of there.
Are
But the
these
pipe
four
is-
options, only options when the lake is up, are needed when the lake is way up?
Correct. That's what the solution is for when the lake is up. That's why we're here, and that's why the petition,
So if the lake is on its way down for 15 years, what's it gonna do for the next, 10, 12 years? What's the system gonna do for the next 12 years?
it's gonna wait.
Well, that's the thing is,
Well, it depends on what system, that, if we go to the south end of the lake, that's a whole new ballgame, and that, whatever's down there will have to work, just like the outfall right now works. It's gonna have to gravity feed steady state. Long pipe to the lake or gravity feed down at the south end. Now, if we go strictly pump, then the pump will do the work, but
yeah, without, I guess, option, in my mind, if you didn't have the sediment issue from the lake, at a minimum, you would replace the culvert and put it, I would do a box culvert or an arch, not culvert instead, and I would pitch it more, so you're not gonna get sediment collecting in that pipe. That's one way to get it. And plus just the structural issue with the road right under there. That's, that sheet piling is holding up the road right now. So at a minimum, I would think you would replace the culvert even if you didn't have the sediment issue. The pump kind of takes care of the sediment issue for when the lake's up. And on option 4, even without the pump, you still have a new culvert in there that's, on most days and maybe most years, gonna pass the water. But I'm sorry, I forgot your name, Dan just said, they do clean it out even when it's not because of it getting clogged with sediment, because that pipe does get sediment in it, just not always from wave action. They do have to clean it out. And you can see it's more than half full with material. They just can't clean out that remaining portion.
Meg Walton, what happens when the power goes out and the pump out? What happens to the pump? With the power?
Well, on electric pumps, unless you have a backup system, they're not gonna operate.
So you have to include a generator in the project too then?
Don't have to. I mean, in a situation like this, I wouldn't do a generator, because if it was a real emergency and you had power out for days and days, and you had, because of severe rain and flooding, you could always, and just bring out a portable diesel pump and switch it out and do it that way. Yeah, once you start going into that and getting them generators and stuff, because this other project I just did, we control the whole lake with a pump system. And we set up a generator system with that. It normally runs off solar power because of this, so it stores everything solar for it, but that's like, it was gonna be like $250,000 when we got all done to do all solar stuff, which is a lot more expensive than I thought, and have a generator system.
So there'd be a way to cover that base without doing a generator, just having a system listed out at the village. Okay, we have to run and get this and do this.
Yeah, Joe Bolton. How's the ultimate decision you're made? Who makes the decision on what option 1, 2, 3, 4, or maybe 5, like my brother mentioned? This is what we're doing.
Well, I'll be key in making the decision, and getting your emails is gonna be key. And Brian's done 150 of these things, so I lean on him. And, we're getting a feel and kind of where you guys want to go and what you want to do. We just, once we get that in place, that'll help us.
I opt for the lowest cost solution here. I really think that that's a smart way to spend their money, but that's just my opinion.
Was that was a natural waterway at one time, right? Before the Culvert was put in, just a natural waterway. So if you put a pumping station in.
I think it was that, I don't think there was an actual connection. From what, I didn't talk to the fisheries biologist from the DNR, but my wetland guy did, and he knew a lot about it, and I thought that was a man-made connection, I'm pretty sure. Because the whole issue was that they used to be able to float logs through it, was the whole thing. So it would have to be fairly a lot larger than it is now, at one point.
Is it possible to get a second opinion of people in the watershed, say the civil engineer, their opinion? Who's in the watershed?
I mean, you can get whatever second opinion, but it doesn't.
Send it via email.
Independent opinion.
And if you get an opinion from say a consultant.
Do not pay a
have them
consultant
send-
to.
Have them
do-
send the email. You include their information, the email, it all goes in the email, and then we'll look at it at the end and make a decision. And that's a review, or how, we have a little span of time for making a change.
Yeah, I mean, between the bidding and the day review, when we let the bid, so when we put plans out for construction in. So in that 6-week period between then and the day review, we'll shore up the district at that point.
So how long are you gonna keep this open for us to have a comment period?
I'd like to have comments within 2 weeks, kind of spread the word. Get them in. I'll take comments quite obviously, up to the very, very end. So, don't hesitate if someone is coming into the area from overwintering in a warmer climate. Let them know we had the meeting. It'll be viewable. All of the notes will be viewable. And at that point in time, they can make a comment. We'll be taking comments right there at the end. But it'd be nice to have.
I mean,
This season will be the season of decision.
This is basically like a milestone point, and from here, then we'll, whatever option we look to, we'll move forward with that in the design and permitting and all that stuff, but we can. So sooner the better, but we can take comments and stuff up to the very end.
Vote on the application.
No, I'm afraid-
Is there a homeowners association for South Bar Lake, like,
Yes.
where you pay dues?
I've got a comment.
Do you pay dues?
No.
Or you guys do weed assessments or weed treatment?
John will be able to talk about that.
No dues.
Do you guys do weed treatment?
Pardon?
Do you guys do weed treatment? Weed treatment in the.
No.
weeds? No,
Yeah,
okay.
No.
Yeah, Lake Michigan Drive has an association.
Well, I was just curious about the lake because, the big thing for, in all of this, when we were going through it, it was just the fact about, it's odd to have a lake level, not have a legal lake level set through the court, through circuit court. And I'm just curious if you guys ever thought about doing that. Because I don't want to get too much into it, but I will say this. If there's ever a time to set a legal lake level, it's right after we finish construction and install the control structure. You would simply be able to set a circuit corridor to lake level. Pretty much all you'd have to pay for is the legal cost and the engineering cost to do this legal study that they required study you have to do and submit to the court. So you're probably talking about a total of like 15,000-20,000 and you'd have a corridor to legal lake level set. But you have to get half the people on the lake to petition to do that, to set it. I'm just saying there'll never be a cheaper time ever to set it.
And I don't know how they determined the current level of the. river.
Yeah, and I don't, that's what I was been trying to find out
I've asked
because I
that,
like,
and nobody
No
has
one
an answer
knows.
for that.
let's do it here.
Because the public will be paying for, and it's not me saying this, I've heard this over and over again, for a private drive, is that gonna put pressure on people to want to walk that drive now, bicycle that drive, remove that gate? I mean, yeah, right, so there's a lot of people saying, hey, if I gotta pay for that, I'm gonna use that road.
Yeah,
That's
we
now a
get-
public road, right?
We get an easement
It's crappy, but.
over
yeah.
the pipes, and just because it's a recorded easement to the drain commissioner, easements are just use rights. So that means it gives him, or the drain commissioner, the use right to be able to have drainage on there. It doesn't mean he can install a park bench and some, picnic tables and have a cookout there, or other residents, the same thing, just because it's a public easement or a public project. They're use rights, they're not ownership rights. Lady there?
I'm Carl Bolton, and I appreciate all that you guys have done and brought this, to our attention. I know usually most assessments are based on, the fact that, who benefits from. I'm a landowner. I do not have property around the lake, but I'm part of the drainage, area with 100 acres, non-ag. And so this is concerning to me. So I know most assessments are based on the benefit. And I know, Brian, you had mentioned that earlier in the talk. But what, you look at the Lake Michigan Drive, you look at Bar Lake, obviously. Are we looking at a percentage based on those residents versus these outliers, like some of the Untitled Chapter?
What do you mean a percentage, like?
Like you're saying they'll be assessed more, but is it per property? You're saying, okay, they'll be assessed more. But I'm concerned because obviously I have acreage that's not ag. And I'm hoping that they pay more because they'll benefit.
They have 100 acres.
Right, so.
And it's
Non-ag,
it's not an ag field, but it's
it's green, but it's part of
Probably
your
woods.
little district with the red lines.
it's vacant.
The exact quote in the law, and the only direction it gives in regards to assessing, is to assess based on benefits derived. That's
Right.
the only direction the drain code gives drain commissioners on how to assess. I guess the easiest way to look at it, when in my mind, someone with a 40-acre parcel that's east of 72 should be paying less than a property a 1 acre property with a house on the lake.
So would that be in writing?
No.
I mean, you're thinking, that, okay,
Yeah.
in terms of documenting something like that is important for homeowners.
No, we
Yeah, I
don't.
have a question that might help clear. The percentage you were talking about earlier, Brian, you were referencing an ag percentage or a farm percentage. Now, a farm percentage, let's say it's a 100 acre farm and they're doing farming, and then there's right next door, there's her 100 acres. It's not farmed, but it's not developed.
Yeah,
So
so
the
the lowest is
percentage-
actually like the undeveloped, it's the untilled, basically your non-farm, vacant areas are your lowest runoff.
So that would be the lowest factor is yours, then the next lowest would be the farmland.
Right.
And they're both, he was quoting 0.05,
Yeah.
which is really small.
Is
So
that the
you're actually gonna be on a little bit, just a fuzz lower than the ag.
What about the wooded property?
That's what she has. That's about the same kind of thing.
Right.
It's a natural setting, not ag. So ag is here and the natural setting is just a little bit lower. So about as low, it is as low as you can get for the factor that goes in the farm.
I mean, doing assessments is a science, but it's more of an art on how to do it. And all I do is drain projects, but assessing is kind of my specialty and what I've done a lot of stuff. Like I've done a lot of like expert case witness work for assessing and stuff. And we just finished a project that was very similar as far as how the district was. It was a project in Caledonia, a lake called Duncan Lake. They had 120 properties on the lake, but then the remaining district was large ag properties. But now they were running off into the lake, but certainly the whole issue was about, they didn't have a way to control their lake height. We were setting the basically the control structures to allow they have a consistent level. And we, all the properties that were on the lake, I think they ended up paying just under $1,000. And what we did was we had acreage as a factor in the formula, but we reduced its importance, made it a percentage of the overall factor. So we made it like really only 10% depended on acreage. So someone's farm, we had a couple of property owners that had like 80 and 100 acre farms. They paid just less than the properties that are on the lake. That would be the art that I would see going and doing the same type of thing on this. So
Just out of curiosity, how much have we spent on consultants to date on this?
I mean, I think I've been paid like 20,000 between the preliminary and this stuff today.
Do this for all the different,
Yeah, I think it was like 3,000 or something for the two of the BOD, and I think I've been paid like 15,000 thus far. I don't know. 12,000.
I'd have to pull that. I apologize for not having that number for you. Again, if you hit me in the email,
okay,
what do we spend so far? But
Is your
it's
email
not
on-
enormous. Well, Laurel's, I think, on the card, getting it to Laurel, and she gets it to me, and then she can put it on the website also. That way, it'll be an accumulation of comments and you can read through them as you're going along. Is that a question there?
When
This
is
might
all-
be the last one. We're gonna wrap this at
Regardless of what option is chosen, if something goes wrong with it, then they call you here at the county to fix it, correct? Because the village has no responsibility anymore.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. I get to.
And then with the 15% contingency, and Dan asked about if it went with the pump option and the pump had to be replaced and there was only $5,000 left, then you would do another assessment, I'm assuming.
Right, you would have to do another assessment, but in doing these projects and I've done over 250 petitions. Only once that we've ever had to do what's called the a deficiency assessment, meaning for however long we did a loan for, and in this case, it was 10 years. In like the 8th year, we, because we ran into a lot of unknowns in construction, we used up a lot of contingency. I don't see a lot of issues like that in construction. Normally, your contingency gets used up when you're working in like a very urban area and there's a lot of the utilities that are in the way and not where they're supposed to be and that type of thing. So, but I don't foresee that here because we're only talking about one location. So likely most of that contingency should be remaining when we're done, and that just stays in the account. And, you know, if there's maintenance that needs to be done, that's how it's paid for, and if it's not, it stays there.
Thanks for coming. Laurel, on the card, on the postcard, it was was that your email? How was that? You remember?
Yeah, I think it's my email.
Your email on it? And then you can go to the county website in the drainage district and go to South Bar and look at all this. And there's contact information there. You can call my office, call administrative office, and get the email location where you need to send your comments.
Can you put the
You could
email about-
snail mail it too.
If you go to leelanau.gov, I'm going to put a short news story. So it's on the front of the webpage with a direct link to today's meeting. And we'll have all the information specific and that quick link to that meeting. And I'll list my email and Susan's.
And Laurel, you want them to include the South Bar Drainage District in their heading?
Anything specific to my